Welcome back to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, a window into the soul of the North Fork of Long Island. We'll delve into the pulse of our community, its pressing issues, promising opportunities, and the rich stories that weave our shared history. I'm your host, Christopher Bianchi, and for episode 91, we sit down with Harry Bubb Jr., a lifelong Greenport native, as he shares his stories of his family and personal memories of a village in transition. Harry begins by introducing us to his life, reflecting on his deep-rooted ancestry, growing up with his family's business, and his school years. Through his vivid storytelling, he offers insight into what Greenport was like during his childhood, while reflecting on how it has changed through the years. So we will start off in the beginning with him introducing himself. So I hope you enjoy episode 81 with Harry Bubb Jr. This episode was recorded July 31st, 2024.
My name is Harry Bubb Jr. I was born November 15th, 1937 in Greenport in Eastern Long Island Hospital. My parents were Harry and Nettie Bubb, lifetime residents of Greenport. The aspect of my life I'm compelled to relate concerns my family business. For 40 years, my family has owned and operated a gasoline service station and garage 2 miles west of Greenport Village on Route 25. It was, at the time, was called the South Road. For that reason, my experience with cars had been more complicated than most and more intense than my peers. Yet my generation of Americans were all, directly or indirectly, affected by America's auto culture. We simply had no choice in the matter. We were destined to become both victims and beneficiaries of the petroleum age we were obliged to live in. My story began when my maternal grandfather, Alexander Rakowski, emigrated from Poland in 1902. His brother, Stanley, followed in 1905. They both started out in this country as laborers in Sage's Brickyard, which was located off of Route 25 or South Road in the small hamlet of Ashamomick, 6 to 8 miles west of Greenport. In 1904, Alex married Josephine Kolakowski. Over the ensuing years, Alex and Josie had 4 children, one of which was my mother. In 1927, Alex saw the opportunities available in the auto business, and he opened a gasoline filling station on his father-in-law's land on South Road, which is Route 25. Despite the vagaries of the Great Depression and World War II, and a number of family tragedies, Alex eked out a living for his family in the auto business there. After World War II, there was a great surge in auto ownership and travel, so grandfather's business was poised to take off. But it was too late for grandfather, for illness took him down in May of 1951. After his passing, my grandmother, Josie, kept the gas station going until September, when my father was able to take over the business. My parents had a small house on Leonard Street in Greenport, which they had to sell to provide the seed money to update the aging gas station and reopen it under my father's management. My family had to move into my grandparents' homestead, while my grandmother and aunt moved into a small apartment in the back of the gas station. This all occurred in 1951, the very same year I entered high school. Because of the demands of the business, I was obligated to help my father in the gas station in the morning, during noon lunch hour, and after school every day of the school year. In the summer, I worked there full time. The normal school day that I would start at 7:30 a.m. when I'd go out to the gas station so father could go to town and pick up vehicles to work on that morning. While waiting for him to return in between customers, I would eat a bag of peanuts and have a Coke for breakfast. When father returned, I would get on my green and white Schwinn bicycle and pedal to my aunt's house across the street from the school, leave my bike in her yard, then race across the street to the school. I was usually late for homeroom period, but I had a standing permission from the school officials to be excused. I got out of school for lunch hour around noon, pedaled back to the gas station, worked with my father while my father ate lunch, and ran any errands that he needed to run. Then I ate lunch and pedaled back to school, generally arriving late for afternoon homeroom period as well. School let out about 3:30, but I usually had sports practice until 5. I played football, baseball, and basketball as the seasons dictated. After practice, I pedaled back to the gas station to let my father have supper. Then I ate supper, and if I had any energy left, I did some homework. If there were any high school games on Saturday, if there were no high school games on Saturday, I helped my father in the gas station, at least for lunch and supper. Likewise on Sunday. Now, my father's gas station was open 10 hours a day in the winter and 12 hours a day in the summer. In the summer, I'd work a normal 8-hour day, but I would get a 2-hour break in the afternoon from 2 to 4, and we'd go swimming with friends, and then I'd come back and finish my shift up. I was very happy about working in the gas station and garage. I was needed, and father was an easy taskmaster. Plus, I enjoyed learning about cars and dealing with the customers and getting to know about the extemporaneous crew that gradually developed around the business. Now, father wasn't a mechanic, so he had to rent out the 5-bay garage adjacent to the gas station to a local guy. And that was Charlie Warren. And he was kind of an interesting guy. And he usually brought his son, Donald, to work with him. And he was a budding mechanic. But he was a goofy looking guy with a thick Coke bottle glasses and a devil may care attitude. And he was called Gopher by one and all. And that was his appearance. But he never failed to lighten up our days. Over time, our friends would gravitate to the garage and gas station on their time off from their jobs and pursuits. And these became fixtures, ad hoc helpers, and ultimately treasured friends. During this summer especially, work and friendships at the gas station flourished and intertwined. My friends John Sullivan, Warren Bashwinner, my girlfriend Dottie Cardinal, along with my younger brother and sister, would often go to the beach together and spend time together. And then later on in the day, I would go back to the station and work the evening hours. All summer long, Gopher and his pals, Buttons and Mac, would stop by to banter and pass the time with us, along with a bevy of other regular customers who became more of an extended family than business associates. Dealing with the customers was often a challenge, for in those days, gas stations were service stations. We really did do service. We washed the customer's windshield, checked the oil, radiator, battery fluids, checked and pumped up the tires, and gave them free maps, and took time to give them directions as needed. And our service was seldom unnoticed and unrewarded. And some of the characters that we dealt with were really characters. We'd get visits from the town drunk, reeking of beer, and wanting someone to talk to. A local doctor would come by for gas, but he wouldn't wait. If you weren't there to pump it right away, he would leave and go to another gas station. He just was too damn busy waiting for anybody. Then we'd get some oddball people. We had a veiled and perfumed lady who would keep her windows tightly shut winter or summer, and only lowered enough to snake her money out to you. Her problem, I later found out that she had cancer. She had skin cancer, and eventually it took her down. But anyhow, it was just a weird type of situation. We'd have Polish farmers, and Greenport was just replete with Polish farmers at that time, and a lot of them, like my grandfather, my uncle. My uncle didn't speak English. My grandfather did. But anyhow, the Polish farmers would come by and they'd smile, and they couldn't speak English, but they would say, they would grab a cabbage or something off the back of the truck. This is for your mother. This is for your mother. And later on in the day, a fisherman would come in with a pickup truck full of fresh fish. And he'd offer to me, and I'd tell him where to stick it because I hated fish. But my father loved fish, so he would always get a fish, and then they would joke and say, "Hey, you're gonna clean it for me," and all that kind of stuff. But of course, this was just normal thing that went on during the course of a day. Then there was this Asian Jewish tradesman in threadbare clothes and an equally worn 1948 Chevy panel truck. He sold my father tools and notions that we couldn't get anyplace else. The old man put his son through Harvard by eking out a living that meager auto supply business, but in the end, his son rejected him. So, working in a gas station was an interesting education for me, but occasionally it was unexpectedly tragic. Our happy and secure gas station community was suddenly shattered when Gopher and Mac went out drinking one Friday night, and there was an auto accident that took Gopher's life and landed Mac in jail for involuntary manslaughter. And that was traumatic for all of us involved. Mac didn't return to the gas station for months after his release from jail. He was obviously a broken man. Soon, he ended up driving drunk again and died behind the wheel. A suicide? I don't know. Maybe just being drunk, but I suspect that he just didn't give a damn anymore. After high school, I went in the Army, and my friend John Sullivan helped my father in the gas station. And next year, my younger brother grew old enough to take my place in the gas station. And father's business continued on and prospered. After the Army and schooling in Chicago and New York, I returned with my young wife to Greenport and the gas station. But I had grown out of any desire to take over the business, and father realized it was time to make a change as well. In 1965, I left Greenport, moved to Connecticut. My father closed the gas station and took a job managing the local movie theater. Our family had operated that gas station in garage for almost 40 long years. And certainly, I think we served the community well. Soon after my father got out of the business, and then he got out at the right time, service stations disappeared from America, replaced by pump your own convenience stores, and the cars became long lasting and much less needful of repairs. And so that kind of business dried up as well. So I think it was very fortunate that my father got out at the right time. During my lifetime, I've owned and repaired, regularly used a multitude of different vehicles, cars, trucks, vans. They've taken me to places near and far, have been intimately involved in both the trivial and important aspects of my life. With a sudden awareness of carbon dioxide emissions and global warming, the consequences of America's long love affair with gasoline-powered automobiles is becoming clear. And hopefully remediation and electric cars will put the nation on a safer track. Yet I find it difficult now to assign blame for the consequences of my generation's love for cars, or even my personal part in it. I was captured young into the America's auto mania and did what I could in order to survive in that world. Working for my father in the gas station in the garage was a unique educational experience, and I thought it would be an interesting bit of Greenport history that you would like as well. Are there any questions you want to ask me right now?
No, that was great. Um, could we going back a bit in terms of was that on your father's side that
That
did
was
they
my
come up?
yeah, my it was on my maternal side of the gas station. Alex was a Polish Rokowski, it was his name, and my German side, the Bub side, also my Bub grandfather lived in town, lived in Greenport, lived on Fifth Street, and he was a machinist at the gag. Trying to say it now, Gafka,
Mm,
Gafka Motor Works, which was where the blacksmith shop was, near right across from the blacksmith shop, which now is a touristy thing. But anyhow, they he worked on what he was doing was they were making one cylinder scallop boats. And they would go out and they would go, and these things were unique because they would go out and then they would chunk, 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 and that's how they sounded. And you could tell they just had one cylinder. And
yes.
my grandfather, Rakowski, actually had his own scallop boat.
Uh,
Before he had the gas station, he would go out scalloping, and he had a boat called the Birdie Bee, and he often landed it on Sixth Street, and the whole family would go out to the little shack that was on the end of right on the end of the road, and they would shuck the scallops, and then they would go off to New York City. So,
what?
but anyhow, go ahead.
So did your mom on her side? Did they say why because they came over in 1902?
Yeah.
Did they say why they came over?
Oh, they were all the ones that came over for the same reason. It was not only simply the better life, but they
Yes.
damn sure didn't want to. They did not want to serve in the Russian army.
Mm,
Oh, see, Poland was part of Russia at that
hmm.
time, and of course they hated the Russians. And when they got to be military age, they were all drafted. So you would find that was the thing that pushed a lot of Polish people out of Poland in that time frame.
Yes.
Now, my
And
grandparents on my Bub family had lived in Brooklyn for quite some time,
in the
and
1800s.
very early 1800s, yeah. And then part of the family moved to Yaphank, which is where Brookhaven is now.
Hmm.
And then my grandfather moved to Greenport. Now, a lot of the people who moved to Greenport were moved here for on the railroad. There were a lot of people moved to work on Long Island Railroad. Then there were various fishing boats, and I don't know that we used to have bunker boats. Bunker were a small fish that they went out and caught, and they would use it for oil. And when I was a kid, there were always bunker boats come into Greenport. There were party fishing boats. I don't know. I think I might have mentioned this to you, where if you wanted to go fishing, somebody in New York or would want to go fishing, and they would call the party fishing guy, captain, and then they would come down and they would go out, and the party fishing guy would usually have he'd have rods and reels and a bait, and I actually worked on one a couple of times where you'd be a mate. You'd take the fish off the hook for the guys and throw it in the chest, and get them beer when they need a beer, and all that kind of stuff. So party fishing boats, there would be a number of party fishing boats in Greenport and Southall. And so, we did a lot of things. In the course of growing up, I worked on a farm picking peas and beans. And God, I hated that. That was the worst job I ever had.
Well, like backbreaking.
Yeah. Well, it was you'd go to bed at night and all you'd see is peas and beans in your sleep because but it's interesting that I had a lot of experiences. I had a lot of work experience. My father was a milkman before he had the gas station.
Mm,
He was a milkman, and I used to work in the summers with him, delivering milk. It's
wow.
greatest job I ever had. For a kid, you're out there with your old man, and you go and he says, "Okay, take a couple of pasteurized over there," and you grab a couple of bottles of pasteurized milk, and you trot over there and put it in and put it next to this doorstep, and come back with the empties, and you go on to the next house.
Mm.
And it was all in the morning. It was beautiful,
Was that the Ashamamek Dairy?
Ashimamic Dairy, yeah,
Ashamamek.
Ashimamic, yeah, with Corazini. Tony
Okay.
Carlini. Yeah. As one of my best friends who just died recently, Joe the farmer, down okay, right down next to he married Pat Corazini, and he had the farm stand right on Albertson Lane, if you've ever been
Okay.
out there. But anyhow, I know where all the bodies are laid. In other words, I know a lot of people. My father was a very gregarious guy, and he lived here all his life, so he knew everybody. And it wasn't unusual for him to be driving down the street, stopping. Hey, how you doing? Wave out the window, and they stop traffic and they talk for a while, and then they go on. It was
Mm,
Greenport was a different place than
mhm.
it is today. Um,
And
Good.
I was going to ask, just with your mother's side, how did they make their way out? Was it for the bricks in
Well,
the
my,
early
my mother
1900s?
was my mother's side was called Kolakowski, and they were here earlier. And
Oh,
quite frankly, I don't know what my great grandfather Kolakowski did for a living. He's the one who had all the land, though. He's the one who had the land for the gas station. He actually had land across the street. And I don't know how he got his money and what he did for a living. And I would really like to know, but everybody's gone.
mm,
Uh, yeah, that was a family, and all the buildings that are in that area. If you go down go to the gas station where the gas station used to be. And the garage is now an antique shop, and you'll see stuff all over all in front of it. But anyhow,
mhm.
all those buildings, those four buildings there, were all built my relatives. One of
Wow.
the Yeah.
And did you get to meet many of your grandparents?
Well,
Or
both my grandparents were alive, and I knew them. Yes, I think I was 13, 12 or 13 when my grandfather died. Rakuski died, the one who owned the gas station, and the other one lived. I was almost 20 when he died. So, yeah, I knew both of my grandparents, and we had an extended family
mhm,
in both directions. But the sad thing that happened in our family was that my uncle, who was my mother's sister, my mother's brother, Uncle Frank, was supposed to take over the garage, and my grandfather was going to run the gas station, and Frank was going to run the garage. He was mechanically inclined and everything like that. And he married a girl from Jamesport, and the girl was a little shy, so she never did any. She was pregnant. She didn't go to the doctors, and so uh, ended up that she died in childbirth, and the child died.
mm,
My uncle, the same year, my uncle died in an auto accident. And then one of my aunt had polio, and she had polio in the 1915 or so. And when they
mhm.
didn't really know a hell of a lot about it, And so she ended up with, after a number of operations, she had one leg shorter than the other, and one arm she couldn't lift up at all.
Hmm.
So, and in those, in those days, there was no such thing as, she could not get on to any kind of compensation whatsoever from the federal government. So,
Yeah.
she was just living off the family. So what it turned out, and then I had another aunt, my mother's other sister, who died of septicemia, and she died very young, probably 35 or 40. So
Okay.
my grandparents had four children. Only one survived to have a normal life.
Hmm.
That was my mother.
And did she go to Greenport High School?
Yeah, she was in the first graduating class of the high school, the
Oh,
new high school,
wow.
what we call the
Wow.
new high school. See, there was
Yes.
an old school, and the old school was over on Third Street, and
Where the
yeah, where the
fire
fire
is.
station is now. Yeah, and that was it was a old wooden school, and then my mother would graduated first year in the Greenport school. So,
What about your father?
well, he graduated from the old school. Yeah, he was a couple of years older.
Did he say what it was like in there or?
Well, yeah, I mean, I know a little bit about that. I've been in the building when, it was still there. I
Yeah.
have one interesting picture that I have, and was a picture of and I wrote a poem about it, but it's a picture of my grandparents and some other people that I know graduating from night school. And, they were all immigrants. And
Mhm.
there were a number of people, including Manuel Gloria. I don't know whether you ever heard of Manuel Gloria. He had
Sounds familiar.
okay, well, there's a Gloria family in Greenport. But anyhow, Manuel Gloria had a soda factory, and right across the railroad tracks on Ninth Street. And Ninth Street is where Cardboard City is. Do you know what Cardboard City is?
Where those housing complex
Yes,
they
the
built
housing
in the
complex.
fifth.
Yeah. Let me tell you about Cardboard City. That was built during World War II for the workers at the shipyard. And my father worked in the shipyard during the war. And we lived in Cardboard City.
Mm.
And it was called Cardboard City because they banged it up real fast. During
Yeah.
the war. They just took a potato field.
It's
They put
pretty
some,
thin walls.
yeah, yeah, it was. It had asbestos shingles on the outside. Of course, nowadays you can't do that. Uh,
Hmm.
Asbestos is no. But yeah, we lived there. We lived there for a few years until after the war, and then we moved over to Leonard Street, which was off of Sixth Street.
Mm.
Okay. But anyhow, why don't I tell you a couple of car stories?
Sure.
Okay. I'll start off with my cousin John. Johnny worked for the telephone company. But anyhow, he had a 1948 Plymouth businessman's coupe, they called it.
Mm.
Anyhow, so it only had the front seat, basically. Anyhow, one day my father says, "Go out and bring Johnny's car in. Okay, bring it in, put it right over there." So okay, fine. So I go in the car and I put the key in, I turn it, and all of a sudden somebody's talking to me from the back seat, and it almost scared the life out of me. Well, the problem was he had a marvelous stereo set, and he had a great seat in the back, a great speaker in the back, and it just turned on to a guy talking. Scared the life out of me. Well, so I turn the radio off and I start up the car and I drive it slowly around to the front of the garage, into one of the bays, and then I step on the brake. There's no brakes. My, my foot goes right to the floor. And fortunately, it's going very, very slow. And it banged into the partition and didn't hurt the wall and didn't hurt the car. And I look over to my father and I says, Pop, did you forget to tell me something? He says, he looks up from where he's working. He says, "Oh, by the way, be careful of Johnny's car. The brakes don't work." But anyhow, that's one of my little stories that I tell because you know I'm I have so many stories because I've been intimately involved in cars over the years. And my first car, one of the first cars that I tried to learn to drive we called it the Green Monster. And if you talk to John Sullivan, he will tell you about it. It was a 1948 Chevy. It was green, and it was the ugliest car you would ever see. But we got it for nothing. My father has somehow picked it up, and he let us have it. So we drove it down to Silvermere Road, which is Silvermere Road is where Silver Sands is located, Hotel Silver Sands. Okay.
Yes.
And in those days, there weren't a lot of houses and stuff there. It was just a lot of dirt roads. So we took it there to learn how to drive.
Yeah.
And John Sullivan and Warren Bashwin and I, we would go and we put a gallon of gas in a container and a can. And we'd walk over there and we'd pour it into the car. We leave the car when we got done with it, on the
Yeah.
roads, on the back roads. Then we'd come over with a gallon of gas, pour it in, and then we'd ride it around, take turns riding it around and trying to keep on the road and not knock over any trees or, end up in a ditch or anything. And all the time we're hooting at each other and giving each other instructions and trying to, when you got three people, they're just trying to learn how to drive and they're just having a hell of a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And so we do that until the gas runs out. And we'd leave the car right where it was, take the gas can, walk back home and say, hey, we had a good time, and that's how we learn how to drive.
Wow.
So anyhow, I can tell you a few more stories if you're up for that.
Sure. Sure.
Now, one of the interesting things that John Sullivan and I did together, one day I was minding the gas station. My father was gone. It was getting dark. I was going to close up, and it was raining. It started to rain. John was with me, so I didn't want him to have to walk home in the rain. So my father had a 1948 Cadillac that he was selling, and it had plates on it, and so and I had the keys. So I wasn't going to let my buddy get wet. So of course this was before I had a license and everything. So I said, okay, come on, John. And we hopped in and we drove back to Greenport. And I turned right at Cardboard City and I damn near hit a telephone pole. Because the car was so big and I wasn't used to driving it, we almost hit a telephone pole. And I snaked around to John's house and dropped him off and then snuck on back to the gas station. And my father, I don't think he ever knew that we did this.
Yeah.
It was one of the ones where we got away with it.
Yeah.
But that's one of our little car tales.
Yes.
And let me tell you one other one. My first day after I got my driver's license, and I read it in my book, the poem about it. But anyhow, I get my driver's license and I'm a man now, and so I gotta drive up to see my girlfriend who lives in Salvo. So I get my father's car and he lets me have the keys to the car for the first time and he's got I think he had 1951 Mercury. And so I get in the car and I back it out and I get on Route 25 and the door flies open and I almost fall out of the car. That was my first. So then I composed myself, got the door closed, drove down to pick up my girlfriend, And then we made the big tour. We drove back to Greenport and we made sure everybody saw us, in the car together. You know how you do when you driver's license and you have to show the world that you're a man, you're
Yeah.
a American boy. So anyhow, but you don't tell everybody that you damn near fell out of the car and onto the road. So let me tell you one more.
Okay.
Okay, one more. I had a Volkswagen. I had a number of Volkswagens over the years, and this one time I was driving with a couple of other people, and we were on the Sunrise Highway. Well, Sunrise Highway is runs along the South Fork, East Hampton, West Hampton, North Hampton. All those Hamptons.
Yeah.
It runs along that side of the island. And I'm driving along and I'm hooting with my friends and all of a sudden I see this wheel rolling in the middle of the road. And I said, oh, some dumb bastard lost their wheel. Then I realized it was one of my wheels. Fortunately, the Volkswagen is a very well-built, balanced car. And it came down. I pulled over immediately. It came down, and like I said, there were three people in the car. And when
Yeah.
nothing bad happened, I opened up the trunk, which is in the front, checked out my spare, and I took one lug bolt from each of the three tires that were left
Hmm.
and put my other tire on. And I was able to drive home, but I never did find that tire though. Anyhow, these are some of the accumulated stories that I have, and it's in my book. If you get a chance to read the book, you'll find some of those in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I was curious, just with your parents, how did they meet?
My parents met. Well, they were in school together, but my mother was a good dancer, and my father wasn't. So my father taught my mother how to dance, and that's how they got basically together. Uh,
Okay.
and in those days, when there was a dance or anything like that, very seldom would you go as a couple. You'd go as a group.
Mm.
There was much. Everybody would go, and then you wouldn't pair up as much as certainly
Hmm.
in my day. So
Yeah.
my aunt Helen, who was the one who died of septicemia, won a contest. I think it was in East Hampton or Southampton, someplace like that, a dance contest, and she got a free airplane ride over New York City out of it. So
Mm.
that's kind of so she was good, and uh, that's another little story. She had TB and she was in the sanatorium in Patchogue.
Hmm.
At those days, that's what they did. They would truck you off to the sanatorium, and the same thing with polio.
Hmm.
They would truck you off to the sanatorium and take care of you as a group, more or
Yeah.
less.
And as a child growing up in Greenport, you mentioned some things you would do for activities outside, but would you hang out at any specific
Well,
places?
we didn't. Yeah, we didn't. Yeah, there was a candy store, and they would across from the movie theater. There was Rouse's had a candy store, and that was the place that we would hang out as teenagers.
Yeah.
So, or we would go to Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz's
It's
bowling and billiards. Uh,
okay.
and I don't know these there. It's where that it's in the middle of town. There's a gas station there now. I don't think it's.
It's
Uh,
next to the Mr. Roberts gas station.
yes, right. That's where it
There's
was.
another business there now, but
Yeah, and I could tell a little story about that. I thought I was, during the exam week one year, we didn't have any classes or to speak of, so we skipped out of school, and
Yeah.
we'd go down to Santa Cruz's and we're playing pool. And I'm playing pool, and I look out the front window and I see my father's truck parked right there. He had a Jeep, funny looking Jeep, and had his name over it and all that kind of stuff. So I knew who it was, and I knew why he was there. So I hopped in the car, and he turned around and drove it back past the school and dropped me off at the school. And he says, "You want to play sports? You don't ever do that again." And that was the extent. I never did anything like that again.
Mhm.
So,
You don't
oh
want
yeah,
to.
I mean, I'm always got, I've got a lot of stories to tell. If you look at my book, you'll see it's very just chock-a-block full of these stories that
Stories.
I've accumulated because cars infected my life,
Yeah.
and and it wasn't one of these things that I ever thought that it was ever gonna happen, but it's just one of these things I got thrown into, and I, when I was in the service, I was a construction equipment mechanic, and I was stationed in France for over 2 years. So when I came home, I worked with my father as a mechanic for a while, and I did a lot of work with Volkswagens. I love the Beatles and both Beatles.
But in terms of coming out of high school,
Went into service. We all went into service because
you.
no, we couldn't afford college in those days.
Mm.
Very few. There would be out of a high school class, mine was 64, 65. There would be maybe six or eight, maybe even as many as 10 that went to
Mm.
college. The rest
But
of us, especially the boys, would go into service.
so
So most of all my friends went into the military. A few of them went to college, and Chris Beck, one of the fellows that I sent you a book of his, who
yes.
Chris was ended up being an engineer with Pitney Bowes, and he had a number of inventions that he had patented. The interesting thing about Chris Beck was, and there's three of us that were started school at 4 years old,
Mm.
and so we graduated. I was 17 when I graduated. Um, Chris was actually 16 when he graduated. Chris Beck. He took a year off, and he made it for one of the rich people who was in charge of Pitney Bowes. And so that's how he got started with Pitney Bowes. They gave him a job, and then he would go to night school, and eventually he became somebody. So
Yeah.
life takes you where it takes you, and I didn't graduate college until 1972, and so I'd already been to art school and been working in New York City as a graphic artist, and before I even went to college. So,
Where did you go to art school?
I went to Farmingdale, the State University at Farmingdale. It was actually a 2-year college at the time.
Hmm.
And I had also been at art school in Chicago before that. So, and I worked in Park Avenue. I worked off Avenue South,
Hmm.
uh, in a small studio, and we did RCA record album covers. We did package design. We did all kinds of. Then, I'll tell you, I got a little second. Another story that I always love to tell is when I worked for United Parcel Service in 1963. I was there when Kennedy was shot, and we heard over the radio, and and everybody in New York went home. It was it was something. We heard it on one of the one of the girls that worked with me had a little radio, and that was the only way we knew. We found out about it. So,
Everyone just closed down for the day.
yeah, New York just closed down. I mean, you could see us, there was just a stream of people heading for the train stations and wherever,
Wow.
all the companies closed right down. And I went home. We had, at the time, my wife and I were living in Ronkonkoma, Long Island, which is, I don't know whether you know where it is. It's kind of a obscure
It's
little
in
place.
the middle,
Yeah,
the
it's right in the
middle.
middle of the island. It's the end of the line, one line of Long Island Railroad. Anyhow, we sat around that weekend, of course, and like everybody else watching, uh, on TV, black and white TV, watching the funeral and everything. It was it was a trauma for everybody. So,
Yes.
but yeah, I worked for United Parcel Service. They had a newsletter, and they probably still do have the same newsletter for their workers. And it was made in New York City, and then distributed. We'd have slightly different versions for every part of the country,
Hmm.
and so that was one of the jobs I had as an artist. So you
And
live long enough. You live long enough. You have a lot of interesting experiences.
yes. And did you ever want to come back to Greenport later on? I know you
Always,
mentioned
always. I always came back to Greenport. I love Greenport. I would never have left it if I could have had a job that I wanted to have.
that you actually wanted to really work,
Yeah, I
something
mean,
that you enjoyed.
I didn't want to. My father was going to give me the gas station, and for nothing, and the customers loved me. Uh, I didn't want to do that, and so I had to leave. And it's a lot of Greenports. A lot of my friends left. John Sullivan, they left because there was nothing you could do here, and you couldn't, especially if you've got a bachelor's degree or any kind of degree. There's not a lot of work you can do, and
Mm.
you could be a teacher, and that kind of thing. So that was a big problem. We all had that same problem. Now my father's generation, most of them stayed home, and
It started more in the 50s and 60s.
yeah, when
That
I,
they,
I I graduated in 55, so that anybody who graduated from say 1950 on pretty much went away from home.
and it
Before
was
that,
going through a tough period after post-war in terms
right,
of the job market and
sure. When the world changed, I'll tell you there was a beautiful thing. There was a beautiful building called Oak Grove. And you can look it up and you can get some pictures from the Historical Society. And I might have even sent you some, but anyhow, there are some on the Historical Society. There's this beautiful dance hall that they had on the bay, and right on Ninth Street. You'd go to Ninth Street and go all the way to the bay, and they had a dining area that overlooked the bay. They had a gazebo. They had a whole bunch of changing rooms. They had a,
Mhm.
a a playground. They had a dock. It was magnificent. And the problem is that what World War One killed it.
Mhm.
Everybody went to work either in the service or into the shipyard, and there was no young kids to go dancing or anything anymore.
Mhm.
And then when the war came to an end, the world had changed.
Mhm.
The world had changed, and this place became redundant. And when I was a kid, I used to go and we'd break in. Well, it wasn't much way of breaking in because the building had been abandoned for,
Yes.
5 or 6 years before I got there. And we'd go in, and it was just magnificent. Had this marvelous mirror on one side, big mirrors on one side, and a big mahogany bar. And
Wow.
it was a beautiful thing. And I write a poem about that one too, of course. I wrote I wrote a poem about damn near everything in Greenport. But and I as a kid, my parents and I used to go there, and that was a really great place to go as a kid.
Wow.
But
They just
you,
couldn't keep it going
no, it
after.
just the world changed.
Hmm.
My father, my father managed a basketball team, Greenport Rockets,
Mm.
and I used to go to the games and be the ball boy, and I'd take the tickets, and then I'd be the ball boy. And that's part of the thing that got me into sports too, because my father was doing that. But that also lasted only a few years after the war because, you know, everything changed and people
Mm.
went different ways. And the war was a very traumatic and changeful thing for people. It's it's difficult for anybody who hadn't been through it to realize that and to see that.
Hmm.
But I was on the edge of that, and I saw a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And
Hmm.
if you get a chance to talk to John Sullivan, he'll tell you a lot of good stuff.
Okay. Oh, the other thing you mentioned your father working at the movie theater, but was that a place that you went to frequently as well?
Oh, I spent my every Saturday, my brother and I, my mother would we'd get our bathtub. Okay, we get our tub and we'd get all dressed up, and then my mother would wrap a quarter or in a dime in a handkerchief for each one of us. And then we would walk along the railroad tracks up to the railroad station and over to the movie theater. And we do the Saturday matinee, which was always two, cartoons, a Western, a mystery. Then later on, my father managed a movie theater. My brother worked in a movie theater for a while, met his wife there, and I ran the movie projector.
Wow.
In my spare time when I was so, to say that I'm connected is to me, I'm connected.
Yes.
Yeah. And I loved running the movie projector, especially when you would get a movie that you really liked.
Mm.
You could watch it a dozen times. So that was fun.
You also mentioned, I think in your book, is it called Schiavone's Operation
Yeah,
Pool and
Schiavone's, yeah.
Bowl? Schiavone's.
Yeah, Scavone's a bowling alley. Yeah,
That
with yeah,
separate from Santa Croce.
yeah, that's at the corner of First and Front Street. Uh,
Yes.
First and Front Street. Um, yeah, the old man that used to run that, I mean, he had a hearing aid, he had one of these old hearing aids, and he smelled like cigar smoke, and the place smelled like cigar smoke. And my father and mother used to bowl there, and they had leagues and everything. And then they would go out over next door to the Wine Dank. Wine Dank was really a great restaurant. Excuse me, not the Wine Dank, Mitchell's. Excuse me.
Mitchell's was more cozy.
Mitchell's was a big, big room. Basically, it had a lot of tables. So they had a lot of, reunions, and we do our football thing at the end of the football season. We'd always have a little feed at Mitchell's,
Mm.
and so it was right next to Scavone. So my parents would go before or after bowling and have a drink, a little nip next
Mhm.
door, and across the street there was a little supermarket, and they would get food there. It, it was a different thing. You'll find when you talk to John, he'll tell you all the places.
In terms of looking back, growing up there, and then you mentioned visiting Greenport. I don't know when the last time was. Was it
Yeah.
maybe 2006? 16
Yeah,
or
I came back. I brought a lot of people to Greenport. I would get, I made, my friends in college in Farmingdale. I would bring them over, and they would spend the night with me in Greenport.
yeah,
And then I have a girlfriend, so I'd bring her to Greenport. Then I
yeah.
had another girlfriend, and I would bring people to Greenport. I love Greenport. And 67 Steps. One of my books is on 67 Steps. Is on the beach rocks. I did
Mm,
a photo book on the beach rocks and basically that was going to 67 Steps and
mhm,
taking close-ups of the colors and patterns in rocks. And my uncle lived a little way from 67 Steps, and my father and I helped him build his house. You know, it was I worked a lot more than most people, but most of our friends did work. My high school friends all pretty much worked, especially the boys. The girls, they would waitress or they would babysit a waitress or something like that, work in their father's store or something.
mhm.
But we all worked because uh, the money was scarce after the war, and it took a long time. It wasn't until the 60s that especially girls would go to college.
Mhm.
Girls really started to go to college around 1960 because they were the children of World War II veterans. So that was a change in society that kids today possibly couldn't possibly see that.
Mhm.
But I could see it because I was there and part of it. So changes that I've seen in my lifetime that you know the younger kids are not going to be able to understand because they weren't there.
Yes.
And one of the most important things I think I learned about is not to make judgments about the past because people did the best they could in the past. My mother was a stay-at-home mother, and nowadays every woman has to go out and be that kind of thing. It
Yeah.
was a different world. And a lot of women like being home and they liked and they made a good thing out of it. No, I was always some that didn't.
Mhm.
And I never had a problem staying home with my kids when my wife was working. And
Mhm.
that was never, I didn't feel that was demeaning to me to work. That's just
No,
here the kids.
no, you have to look at it from a different time period and understand that there obviously were changes then, and putting these judgments doesn't. You need to just
Yeah, you can't
understand
you
it.
can't judge you can't judge the past because you weren't there, and it's just like woman got pregnant, that would ruin their whole lives in my time frame.
Mhm.
And today, you could get abortion, or you could have the child, or you could go for adoption, and you'd be respectable anyway. You know what I mean? No matter
Yes.
what your decision was, it would be accepted. You know,
Yeah. But just Greenport today, I've only been here for, like I told you, for two
yeah,
years, but just in terms of seeing how things are and talking with people, obviously it's changed. And whether things into the 90s, it changes with Mitchell Park
sure.
and obviously people said maybe we've had so much success that now, not that we're mimicking the South Fork, but that we are dealing with, say, the
The
housing
housing thing is
prices and how do
my father.
we,
Yeah, my father had a house on Fifth Avenue, Sixth Avenue, excuse me, across from the Catholic Church, is the Sixth Avenue, and I think he sold it for peanuts. And when he
yeah,
went to Florida, and of course now it's probably worth $1 million. So
yes.
yeah, that's that's a terrible thing that people are not going to East Hampton or Southampton. They're going to Greenport now.
Hmm.
It's just the way it is. Money goes where it can go, and it
And
gentrifies the place and makes it really tough. Now, like I say, the Greenport. If you ever see the movie called The Best Years of Our Lives, okay,
I
Best
don't
Years
think
of
I've
Our Lives,
seen that.
okay, I'll recommend it to you. It's a very accurate movie about three World War II veterans who return home.
Mm.
And the reason why I mention it is because there were some scenes in there that look like they came right out of Greenport.
Mm.
And there was some houses there that were, almost shacks. And
Mm.
and that's the way there were houses like that in Greenport.
That were just basic shacks.
Yeah. And so like I say, we want to do. I think we want to do one about then and now, and
Yeah.
it's such an important thing to for the kids to know that the world was different, how it was different, and it was acceptable to be different, just like it
Mhm.
is acceptable now to be damn, to it's more loosey goosey, but it was much more regimented.
Yes.
Like the poor woman who she was a beautiful woman at one time who had skin cancer, and she would come in the gas station and she would never open a window, and she had a veil. She would always have a veil on, and she was
Mm.
sneaking money through. She didn't want to, be with anybody, but she had to
Yeah.
get gas.
Yeah.
And later on, I found out that she had skin cancer, and eventually she died from it.
Mm.
And she was a beautiful woman at the time, and her daughters were beautiful.
Yeah. I want to thank you for coming on the podcast today and sharing your story. It was a real pleasure to talk with you today. And I think it's important to hear a wide range of stories like that.
And you will, and I encourage you to do more, because we're all I got one foot in the grave and the other on a banana peel right now, and so we have to tell our stories while we can.
Yes.
And just I lost my friend Joe Boszewski, who was Farmer Joe, and he lived in Albertson Lane, and he was in the fire department for umpteen years, and he was my oldest friend, but he just
Mm.
passed a couple of months ago. So
Yeah. No, it's definitely important.
it's part of the kids' education to know the past,
Yes.
not the past in the history books, the real.
That's kind of glossed over and curated a lot.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I love Greenport, and I'd be there today if I could afford to live there.
Well, I hope you enjoyed episode 91 with Harry Bubb Jr. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, and we'll see you next time.